follow-up interview with the Speaker Tom Murphy, on the 5th of May, 1988. One of the things we didn't talk about last time about your early years in the House was the two railroad controversy in the 7th District, and maybe you could talk about that.
Well, I was on the State Property Control Commission. I was elected by the House to represent the House on it, and of course the Central Georgia Railroad ran through my county, and the Southern had acquired it, and they had just about disbanded the Central Georgia through our area. They'd cut it down to nothing. They wanted to lease the W&A Railroad. Southern already had their railroad to Chattanooga, and then they had the Central Georgia to Chattanooga. Had they gotten the W&A, they would have absolutely had a monopoly of rail transportation in northwest Georgia. And that I didn't believe was best for the northwest Georgia or best for the state. They only got, I think, 2 votes all out of the 7th District, all they got. No, they got 3, I take that back. Had one boy whose family owned a cement plant in Rome who was between the Southern and the Central Railroad, and he said, if I vote against them, my folks, they'll put my folks out of business. Had another fellow, Maddox Hale, who was Speaker Pro Tem, who said he'd represent the Southern Railroad for 35 years, and he just couldn't vote against them. And then we had another fellow who told us he was going to vote with us, but somehow they got to him and he voted against us. But it was an issue of what was best for northwest Georgia.
The competitor was which, the L&N?
L&N.
So now
the NC and St. L had it for years, you know, and when the lease expired, the L&N, of course, had bought the NC and St. L, and Southern was trying to break the NC and St. L&N's line of traffic through Georgia, and it would have been a disaster for northwest Georgia. It was a heck of a fight. It was one heck of a fight. I remember, you know, the Southern Railroad set up a hospitality room with entertainment and anything you wanted, I suppose. And I'd never been in it. One night I met this friend of mine, and he said, let's go up to the Southern Railroad's hospitality room. I said, they liable to throw me out the window if I go. He said, I didn't want nobody to say a word to you. We walked in there. When I walked in, the guy hit the guitar, and it just quit like you'd turned the radio off. It got just as quiet when I walked in. I told him, I'm just here to enjoy your hospitality. Now, you're not going to change me, and I'm not going to try to change you. And I stayed there 15 minutes and then got out of there. That's the only time I was ever in that room. When we was debating the thing, the 7th District had a meeting in my office. I guess I was the floor leader then. We agreed I would speak for the 7th District, and at a certain signal, they would all come gather behind me. And I spoke for a few minutes, and when I gave the signal, they all came and gathered behind me, and I said, this is who I speak for, the 7th District.
So in the well?
Yeah, in the well. They all gathered around me right behind the well, and this fella, Phil Lanier, was solicitor for the L&N, and the fellow who was later Secretary of Army, Claytor, he was the solicitor and the general counsel for the Southern Railroad. They were sitting side by side in the gallery. Phil later told me, he said that Mr. Claytor turned to him when they all came down behind me there and said, well, Phil, said, I know you know how they do it in Richmond, and I know how to do it in Washington, but said, I've been damned if I know how to do it in Georgia. Of course, didn't nobody give us a head. Got the lease approved in the State Property Control Commission, and they just didn't think the House was going against it. But we put up a good effort, and of course, then they didn't bid on it when it was Southern did not bid the second time.
Okay, you know. They left it to the L&N.
But the L&N, it's made us millions and millions of dollars. Turning down the first lease, I think the first thing it made us $25 million really on the original lease, and of course with all the acceleration clauses, it's made us millions and millions of dollars turning them down that first time.
Did you have any problems with your father having worked for the Central and the Central?
No, my brother was working for the Central Georgia then, and one Saturday morning, I can't remember the old gentleman's name. He had been train master. Dillard was his name. He had been train master there at Cedartown where my daddy worked, and he was then president of the Central Georgia at Savannah. And he called me, tried to change me told me how much the railroad, Central Georgia Railroad meant to me, and I said, I agree with you, and it's meant a lot to me, and it meant a lot to my daddy, but I think if my daddy was here, he'd be hollering hooray for me to do it, to do what I'm doing, and I know he'd tell me to do what I thought was best for the state. And he didn't tarry with me long. He was a fine old gentleman, Mr. Dillard was. Somewhere along the line, I don't remember, it was some of the lower people who suggested that maybe my brother might get fired as a result of my position in this. And I told them that'd be fine. The day they fired him, I'd give him a job working in my law firm, doing record work and doing investigation for making more money than the railroad was paying him. That'd be fine. And that ended that right there.
So he was by that time working for the railroad.
Oh, he'd been working for him all the time.
You were in partnership at one point.
No. This was my older brother.
Okay,
This was not the brother who was a lawyer. My brother had never. He worked for the Central Georgia Railroad. Him and my daddy worked together.
Okay, so he was.
He's not my law partner brother. He was another brother. There were four of us boys.
That's right. And two became lawyers, and
two worked for railroad.
Okay, but he never was in any jeopardy then, really.
Not really.
What kind of lobbying other than the hospitality suite would the railroads put up in that fight?
Well, of course they used the old they used the saying, trying to say, well, we want it in the State Property Control Commission fair and square, and that we ought to get it and all that sort of stuff. Of course, we fought basically on what it was going to do to Northwest Georgia, and used all of our friendships with our members who we had helped through the years with things. Fortunately, enough of them agreed with us.
So it had passed through the commission and then went on to the floor.
Yeah, got out of the committee
Mm-hmm.
and went to the floor, and we beat it on the floor. I think it was 2 votes we beat. It was close.
Whose idea was it to line all the 7th?
I don't really know. We met in my office, and that was just a strategy we agreed on. I have no idea whose idea it was.
Was that pretty unusual to do something like that?
It's the only time it's ever happened.
So they were at that time 20 something.
Yeah. They just decided that since I knew about it, they wanted me to do the talking for the 7th district, and they evidenced it by coming down.
So that was one point I had not brought up the last time. And then I gather that you cast the I didn't realize it at the time when we talked last, but I gather that you were the person who actually cast the tie-breaking vote for Maddox over Callaway, the vote that put Maddox over the top. Is that correct?
I do not remember that. I do not know. There never was any doubt
Right.
who I was going to vote for, because I said way back after whatever got started that I would vote for whoever my county went with, because I would vote to will the majority of my people.
How did I know there's a lot of talk about how the Ellis Arnold write-in campaign and so forth impacted that election. What is your opinion about that?
Well, I don't think there's any question it impacted it, because it kept one of them from getting a majority. I don't think any question that it impacted it. I thought it would have been better had it not happened, and I thought Governor Arnold was wrong in doing it. But everybody has to live by his own conscience.
Now he's talked about that he didn't sponsor that write-in movement and so forth and so on.
I don't recall that being exactly that way myself.
What do you recall?
Well, I think he was very active in it.
And then before we get to your term as speaker, I noticed that I guess it was during reapportionment in the 1970s reapportionment that you and the speaker at that time, you and George L. had a controversy about the number of seats in the House.
And he won.
He won.
He won.
Maybe you could recall that whole.
Busby was with me on that one, though. It was what was so funny about that, because they were about to lose a representative in Dougherty County. But George L. was a master politician. He was absolutely I suspect he's probably the finest politician that ever come through this body. And the newspapers wanted it reduced, and he wanted their backing, and that's the way he got it, in my honest opinion. That was my assessment of the situation. He didn't really care whether the House was reduced or not, but the newspapers wanted it, and he was a master politician, and he knew if he could get on their side, they'd get on his side, and it worked well for him.
Well, maybe you set the context of why the newspapers had made an issue of it at that particular time.
I don't know. I don't really know. I think they really started it. See, George L. did something that I didn't do. He met with the newspaper editorial staff quite frequently, many times he'd meet them. I've never met with them but once, and we disagreed on 95% of the things we talked about, and I've never been back.
But he would try to cultivate them, you're saying?
He was a master at, I don't know, at wire working folks around to get it to come out like he wanted it to come out, you know. And I'm terribly bad at that. I'm just not good at that. I'm just got to be right straight up front myself. But he could meet with them, and somehow when it's over with, they all came out together, and usually it would be his way.
And that, yeah.
But he knew when something was going to go their way, and somehow he found some way for it to be his position where they'd always be on his side. You know, I wished I was that good, but I'm not.
Why did you fight so hard on the 195 versus the 180?
Well, of course, the 195, the 180, the 15 representatives all come out of rural Georgia, and it cut rural Georgia's voice down very drastically when you took those 15 representatives out of it. That's basically what happened, and you started putting the little counties with the bigger counties, and the little county lost its identity.
And you feel that really was?
It hurt rural Georgia, no question about that. That's the reason we wrote in the new Constitution it would be not less than 180. They got to have a constitutional amendment to change that figure now.
That was the Constitution?
This last Constitution.
Under Busby?
Yeah. Shall not be less than 180. It can be more, but it can be less.
Right. I remember in the 1970s debate, there's talk about even reducing it below 180,
yeah,
down to 160 something, or
yeah,
whatever it was. Yeah. Now, I mean, that brings up a point.
You know, as I look back over that, when we had the first reapportionment, went from 205 to 195. I was exceedingly lucky because we'd already been elected, you know, and my county just fit the 195 number perfectly, so I didn't have to run again, but many folks had to run again, you know.
This is the 65?
I don't remember what year it was. It was when we went from 205 to 195.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you said your county fit the 195?
The numbers was just exactly what the number would be.
Population, in other words. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is about your third term, something like that? Second, third term? And then,
I'd say it's a third. I don't really recall.
Yeah.
I was elected in 61, and I guess that was in 60. Well, I can't honestly say.
Now, in that vote, in the campaign for Speaker Pro Tem, and some other things along the line, you have been associated very strongly with rural interests and...
Well, I wasn't question my interest with rural because I came from rural Georgia. You know, in the first organization of the House, Busby and I ran against each other for majority leader, and he beat me 5 votes for majority leader. But in the Speaker Pro Tem race, there were Bill Lee, Quimby Melton, Clarence Vaughn, Bill Williams, Elliott Levitas, myself. There were 6 of us in it. And of course, all I did was just talk to those members I saw. I didn't write letters or call them on the phone. But as I recall, I got 50-something votes on the first thing, and Elliott got 44. And then in the second vote, he picked up 8 or 10, and I got all the rest of them, as I recall. But I guess my guess of the reason I got that many votes on the first vote is if I couldn't help a fella, I would tell him I can't help you. There's no need for me to lie to you about it, but I used to write amendments for people out there. And you know, we didn't have all the staff we had then, and I'd write them in longhand for them, and even folks would come get me to write amendments for them that they knew I was against, because they knew if I said they asked me to write that amendment, that I'd write what they wanted wrote on it, even though I wasn't for it. I've done that. I mean, I've written a mini amendment for a fellow that I was against, but I wrote it like he wanted, because I'm a great believer in honor. I believe you've got to be honest. And those folks knew that that's the way I'd be if I got to be Speaker Pro Tem. I'd treat everybody just alike. I was very pleased with the vote I got. Of course, I had nearly all the 7th district locked up, you know.
That's right.
And then I got all the 9th probably,
Mm-hmm.
and I had some from South Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
And in the runoff, of course, they all came together.
Right. You got 100 and something.
It was the rest of us against the Atlanta area, I guess, is what happened.
I want to get back to your relationship to urban and suburban Georgia too, but in a minute. But I just wanted to ask, what have you learned from that race against Busby for majority leader?
I didn't learn anything from it. George and I were very close friends. He and I and Sloppy had been we were real close friends, and we always have. Wasn't any wedge between us. So.
No, I meant in terms of winning a campaign for leadership.
He just had been here longer. I hadn't been here then, but 6 years,
yeah.
you know, and he'd been here, 10 at that time?
That's right.
And I was sort of an upstart, to tell you the truth. Of course, I was a maverick back in those days. Pretty bad maverick, I guess. But I don't think I learned a lot from that race. I just think that the numbers happened to be in my favor this time, and they wasn't the first time. I think that's just basically it.
Well, now getting back to the rural, urban, et cetera, you know, you've also, though, if I'm not mistaken, argued on behalf of things that were connected to Metro Atlanta.
Oh yes, they generally credited me with making the speech that passed the MARTA bill. You know.
Maybe you could tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I remember we had a bill up that session about land classification, taxing for land classification, and the boys from South Georgia wanted it real bad. But it would have destroyed my county. I mean, my tax digest would have gone down, and I voted against it myself. When we got in the MARTA bill, I had a real good friend who sit right behind me, and I won't call his name because he was a real good friend, but I remember him saying, now they're going to pay for them pine trees, they're fixing to kill that MARTA bill. You know, and one of my closest friends sit on my right, and he was against the MARTA bill. And of course, when I made my speech, I remember some of the things I said. I remember if George T. was speaker, he sent me a note, wanted me to speak for the MARTA bill, and I shook my head no. They just kept talking, and then my friend said that about, well, now they're going to pay for them pine trees. Well, that just made me mad as the devil, you know. Pit one bill against another, regardless of what's good for the state, that just made me mad. I told George if he'd give me the last 5 minutes of the last 20 minutes, I would make a speech. But he said, you can have the whole 20 minutes. I said, 5 minutes, all I want. Well, that was all it was. The last 20 was my 5 minutes. And then I remember I told them that they were trying to penalize one section of our state because those people felt like that the land classification bill wasn't proper, and that ain't the way we supposed to do business in Georgia. Of course, I was much more eloquent than that, I would hope. And I told them, I says, we're pouring millions and millions of dollars down these rat holes we call expressways that are obsolete before we complete them, and this will save us millions and millions of dollars. And of course, when I sit down, they voted, and it passed. I don't remember how it passed, but my friend who's sitting next to me, he held his hand over that voting machine, and he just held it there, and finally he voted for the thing, you know.
He did.
Yeah, he voted for it. When he voted for it and it passed, he turned to me and he said, you jackass, said, you didn't convince them, you just shamed them into voting for it. I mean, that's when it was fun, though, when you can participate in the debates and get your adrenaline flowing, you know, that's when it's fun. You know? I've always been an advocate, and sometimes it's tough to be up there on that podium and see something going down you know ought not to be going. Just have to sit there and listen, you know.
Right.
Sometimes I get enough and I come down, but it ain't often.
Right. What had convinced you about the Marta bill for?
Well, I don't think there's any question that there's no way we could build enough highways to get the people into Atlanta that work in this area. And what I said was accurate. The expressways were obsolete before we were complete. I mean, we were pouring billions of dollars down. And I think I was totally right in Marta. I think it's been a great thing for Atlanta.
The other two pieces of legislation or areas that I've seen you connected with and are also connected with in Atlanta are, of course, World Congress Center and also mixed drinks, if I'm not mistaken, too.
Well, the World Congress Center, to me, I could never understand why anybody would be against the World Congress Center. Because everybody conceded to start with that it would generate way more than enough money to pay the debt service that we would have. I think the first figure was that after we generated the revenue to pay the debt service, we'd have $15 to $20 million left to go. And to me, it was just good business to do that. And then on top of that, I think I said in that debate that Atlanta's not only the capital city of Georgia, it's the economic capital of the entire Southeast. And if we sit around on our fannies and let that economic center get away from us, we deserve what we're going to get. And I think I was accurate, and I felt like it. That's the reason I couldn't understand some of these folks fussing about our carpet center. It's the carpet center of the world up there. Why shouldn't they have something to show it off? I mean, it just don't make sense to me. But unfortunately, the Atlanta newspapers, all they want is what's for Atlanta. They don't want nothing for the rest of that stuff. And those days are gone. I guarantee you those days are gone.
Do you see any prospects of similar kinds of centers?
Well, we did a little thing down in southwest Georgia on Lake Walter F. George. 85% of the water in Georgia, 90% of development in Alabama. They have to even tow their boats over into Alabama to buy gas. And we built that little center down there now. We've authorized it. It's now in construction. I think you're going to see lots of that. And it's time we did some of those things. We've done enough with it now.
So that will address the so-called two Georgia.
Right. Well, I never have subscribed to the philosophy that we have two Georgias. I like to say it. We have one Georgia, but we have many different economies in Georgia, and it behooves us to try to beef up the economy in those where it's not so good.
On the World Congress Center one, where was opposition coming from?
Most all of rural Georgia. Most all of rural Georgia. Some of my closest friends was tough to get them to vote for it. Now they see what it's doing for us. They understand it's generating, I'd say, $35–40 million of revenue over and above the debt service now. And some of that's going to rural Georgia, and they ought to be for it. But it's time we started doing some of those things for rural Georgia to help them start growing.
I've noticed that the World Congress Center dragged for a few years through the legislature, that it took a while to deal with oversight, site selection, financing, et cetera, down the list there.
I don't know how long it took. I know the first time we got it to the floor, we passed it.
And then, were you at all involved in the mixed drink legislation?
I helped them pass it behind the scenes because Atlanta is a convention center. It's a center that if you don't have the mixed drinks, you're not going to get those things. And obviously the people in Atlanta wanted it, and I think they were entitled to have what they needed.
Did you get any heat from that, or what?
No, my folks have been exceedingly kind to me.
I wonder, are there any problems in being in a state-line county concerning different types of things that are legislated?
Not really.
You have ever?
Not really. We're lucky in my county because none of our people go to Alabama to trade. All the people from Alabama come to Georgia to trade. It's more of an influx than it is an out.
Okay.
We're exceedingly fortunate.
Okay. Now, when you became speaker, last time we began to talk about some of the procedures that you instituted concerning debate.
Well, of course, the first thing I did was I started giving the urban areas their rightful part of the leadership team. I appointed Elliot, I appointed Gerald Horton, Sidney Marcus, and somebody else. I made 3 committee chairmen out of the urban, and Frank Pinkston got one. I mean, George L. had cut the urban people out of the leadership team, and I started putting them in the leadership team. As a matter of fact, the urban caucus never met after I made my first appointments. That ended the urban caucus.
I was going to ask, that was related to the
Yeah,
formation of the urban caucus.
I set out to destroy it, and that's exactly what I did, because I give the urban people their leadership percentage in the leadership team, and the urban caucus had no reason to meet anymore.
Okay, so you would set out to destroy the urban caucus for what reasons?
Because it was pulling Georgia further apart. Rural and urban Georgia were just getting further and further apart. Then they wanted to form a rural caucus. And I say we're all a caucus. The Georgia House of Representatives is the caucus for all of Georgia. And that's what it ought to be. And every section of the state ought to have their input into the leadership. And that's what I set out to do, and that's what I did. It shocked some of my rural colleagues, but when they saw how it worked, they were very happy with it. Also, I started making drastic changes. Up until then, the constitutional officer and department heads had floor passes. They run anywhere they wanted to. And the lobbyists had passes to the north and south lobby. Well, the first year I got in there, after I was elected for a 2-year full term, I made the decision that I would not give lobbyists any type pass. They'd stay in the halls and corridors where they belonged. They had no business being in the inner sanctum, and so I didn't give them anything. I also made the decision that constitutional officers and department heads had no business on the floor because they were lobbying for their department. So I made the decision I would give them lobby passes. One of my closest friends, who had been in the floor leader's office with me when I was floor leader, he was a constitutional officer, and I sent him his lobby pass, and he come in my office and dropped it on the desk and said, "I'm a constitutional officer. I'm entitled to a floor pass." And I called him by his name. I said, "No, you know what you're entitled to under the rules of the House?" He says, "What?" I said, "Whatever I say you are." And he said, "Well, if I can't have a floor pass, I don't want anything." That's when he dropped his lobby pass. I just picked it up and tore it up. I said, "Okay, you ain't got nothing now." Less than 2 weeks, he sent his chief aide in there one morning. "I'll get you at 7:30 in the morning." His chief aide eased in there about 8:15 and said, "My boss won't know if he can have that lobby pass." I sort of laughed and said, "Sure he can have it." And so I gave him his lobby. I never had any more problems.
It's a funny story.
But I have tried to restrict the news media from being on the floor so much. We've done away with eating on the floor. We've done away with reading newspapers on the floor.
Right.
I would like very much to restrict this next coming year, assuming I'll be re-elected speaker. I'm not going to give any floor passes to committee aides and committee secretaries. They're going to have to send in and get their chairman just like everybody else. So I'm going to try to restrict it further, because last time I noticed that we had committee aides and research folks on the floor of the House all the time, and I just made the decision. I've talked to most all the leadership team, and they agree with me. Someday it will get to the place where nobody has a right to the floor except the membership and the clerk's office. People that need to be there are messengers. It will get there someday. We've come a long, long way in the last 12 years, but we still got some way to go.
I was going to say, maybe you could contrast that to what it was like when you entered, or throughout the 60s into the 70s.
Oh, everybody just came and go as they saw fit, really. And the doorkeepers were there really just to open the door if anybody wanted to come in. And now you have to have the identification at least to get on, and hopefully we will continue to restrict it. I hope someday the House will agree to keep the families off the floor, but they're not to that point yet.
It's hard. I noticed, especially in the last few days, you have a stream of people who keep on coming up, and
yeah, it's tough. I tried this year. I sent out a questionnaire, tried to get to quit taking pictures during the in session, but the members didn't want that because they use that for their political.
Sure.
I had many of them demonstrated. You go in a house where you're campaigning, there's your picture and their child on the mantle. It's where you know you got votes there. You know. So I understand that. I'm a political animal too.
So it doesn't look like that's gonna.
We slowed it down considerably. We at least last year did stop them from bringing mayors and council and commissioners in there. You know.
And there was also discouraged placards from the gallery too.
We'd stopped that altogether. No demonstrations in the gallery whatsoever. We throw them out immediately. We don't let them have signs in the gallery and all that sort of stuff. We have done that.
What prompted you to take all those steps right in that 75?
Well, educational television was responsible for a lot of it, because after we let educational television on the floor everywhere I'd go to make a speech, they'd say, we watch that. I'd ask them, I said, how do you like that educational television? They said, we watch it, we like it, we enjoy it, but how do you know what's going on with all that confusion? And that's when we started doing all that.
Okay, so
Of
TV.
course, educational television has been good for that, but it's been bad in other regards, because it does stimulate a lot of unnecessary speeches. People want to get on that television. It
Right.
does do that.
That's right. That's right. So people tend to make speeches rather than address the issues per se.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, that 1975 session was really a critical one, perhaps even more than the 74. The 74 was your first, but 75 was the first after being elected. You had a new governor, so forth and so on.
It was right critical, but it worked well. George and I, of course, were very close friends, and we worked 99% of our differences out, to where both of us could live with them, and it was critical, but I still believe that the membership liked what we did. They liked the restrictions we put on it, and the more you put on it after you get them used to it, the better they like it.
But you saying at first they were...
They were a little leery of it, no question about that.
I guess you were hospitalized right before that 75 session, is that not right?
No.
You were treated or...
I was elected in '74.
Right. I saw something of...
I had hepatitis, and that was in '72. Right before I was reelected Speaker Pro Tem the second time, I was hospitalized. I was in isolation for 2 weeks with hepatitis. And that's when they put the private restroom in my thing, because that's where I figured I caught it, you know. And that's when I caught all that flack about that private restroom that George L. put in there for the Speaker Pro Tem's office.
Okay.
I never got to use it long. After they finished it, I think he died in about 3 months, and then Burris got it, you know, and then Connell got it.
Right. What, maybe you could say a little bit about the challenge from Burris that particular year.
Well, I have to say that I caused some of that, because as I look back over it, I'm not proud of it, but I was a little arrogant, and I didn't include Al in the leadership team as I should have. And Burris was a good man. He was a very ambitious fellow, though. Wasn't all my fault. Some of it was my fault. I admit that. I admit that freely and voluntarily. I made a lot of mistakes in my life, but it ain't never been a problem for me to admit it. But that was a lot of my fault. But it was good for us. Al and I became very close friends after that.
After the challenge.
After the challenge, we became very close friends. I had done some things I shouldn't have done. I had not done some things I should have done, and it was good for me. It made a better man out of me. I believe it made a better man.
What sorts of things are you talking about?
Well, I began to bring more folks into the leadership team and have more input into where everybody could have their say-so and become involved in it. I refused to make any promises to get reelected. Of course, now Al did promise a lot of people chairmanship. He did a lot of that. I did not do it. I refused to make the first promise to get anybody elected. When they come and ask me, if you'll give me this, I'll vote for you. I said, if I got to take the job where I can't do it, I don't want it. I'm not going to, and I did not make the first promise. That is the truest statement that I ever made. I did not make the first promise. Right before the election, there were 10 of us met in my suite over at the hotel, and I had 118 commitments. And it took, what, 100 and, there's 160 so of us, so it took maybe 80-something commitments to win, you know. And I had 118 commitments. And there's 10 of us met in my hotel suite, and unless we all unanimously agreed on the name, we would not count it. And it was amazing. We agreed on 98 people, unanimously, 98 people, and that's what votes I got.
98 to 15. Right.
I don't remember what it was.
98, 58.
Yeah, 166.
Yeah.
So it took 87 votes to win. But I had 118 commitments.
98 were the unanimous ones.
98 were what all 10 of us agreed. That was, if anyone disagreed, we didn't count it. And we counted 98 votes. And that's what I got. That was sort of amazing to me. I still got all those old records, those old commitments and those things. And I look through there once in a while and just sort of grin, you know.
So at that time you predicted the vote pretty well, you're saying?
Those 10 of us predicted it right down to the vote.
Right. Who were some of your lieutenants in that, or your allies, as it were, who were among those 10?
Oh, well, let's see. I can't think I can name the 10. It was me, Marcus, Joe Frank, Crawford Ware, Tom Buck, Frank Pinkston, Castleberry,
Mm-hmm.
Carlton.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember. That's about all I can remember.
Okay. Speaking of Castleberry and Collins, for that matter, too, maybe you could talk about the 3 C's. Do you remember?
Well, that was Don Castleberry, Marcus Collins, and Jack Connell, and that was the amendment that they tried to put in. Well, they did put it in, but it wasn't as strong as they wanted it to be, or as I wanted it to be, for that matter. With these rules and regulations that they make, to have to submit them to the Lieutenant Governor, Speaker's office. They assign them to a committee. If the committee disagrees with them, then they have to meet with the committee and try to work out
rules and regulations
Yeah.
for state agencies.
Right. They have to meet with the committee and try to work out their differences. If they can't, they can still put them into effect, but at least you can delay it till a year, and then we'd have a chance in January to change them, you know, if we disagree with it. I don't know of a single one so far that's been put in effect that the committee disagreed with, though.
Oh, really? Okay. So it was sort of symbolic, you're saying, that the legislature should have some
If
sort
it's
of
going to have the
say-so.
effect of law, they should have some say-so in it. That's what's happened to us in Washington. The bureaucrats make all those rules and regulations. The Congress doesn't know what's going on, and they're running the darn government.
And that was pretty strongly opposed by the governor's
Yeah, oh
office.
yes.
With what kind of effect?
The effect of it was we had it when it was drawn, to where if we disagreed with it, it could not go into effect under any circumstances. If either house disagreed with it, but we could not pass that. We could have passed it in the House, but we couldn't pass it in the Senate.
Which of course leads to a whole other area.
That's
of-
right. That leads to a whole different ball game. But I think the 3C thing has been very effective, really.
So it still is in effect.
Oh, yes.
What percentage? Well, sort of anything that involves regulations.
That's right. It has the force of law. They have to submit it to the committee, but if they disagree, if they can't work it out with the committee, they still can put it into effect. But as I say, I don't know of a one that's been put in effect.
So you're saying right at that point, 75, 76, whenever it was, there was a substantial difference between the House and the Senate on that and other points. Maybe you could, and of course between your office and the Lieutenant Governor at that time.
Well, I would say the major differences between the House and the Senate has been 2 things: DOT and tax measures. They resent that we have to initiate all tax measures and the budget. They resent that. Of course, that's the way it is in any government that I know. that has Senate and the House. They also realized that they got snookered, even though it hadn't been effective, an election of the DOT board members when the people from the congressional district elected them, when we outvote them 3-1. See,
How is that now?
there are 3 times as many House members in the congressional district as there are senators in the congressional district, so we outvote them 3-1, you know. Of course, the DOT has controlled that with their roads by giving a member this road or this bridge if he'd vote for this man, and that's what I resent so badly, for them telling us who to elect as their boss. I resent that very badly.
You resent the DOT.
Taking our money, giving roads and contracts to members to get them to vote for who they want for their boss. In other words, they're telling us who to elect as their boss, and I don't like that. I hadn't made any secret of that.
Right. And in fact, if I'm not, when Busby was still governor-elect, you made mention of his replacing Downing Musgrove with Tom Moreland at that time.
I don't remember all that.
So when did the current way of electing the DOT board come in?
It came in Carl Sanders' administration. We passed it during his administration, but the Constitutional Amendment didn't go into effect till after he left office. He run it out of his hip pocket as long as he is governor.
Who was the...
Jim Gillis.
It was still Jim Gillis at that time, that's right. They had supported Sanders.
We passed the Constitutional Amendment during Carl's administration, but the effective date was after he went out of office, you see. So he ran it while he was governor.
And then under Maddox, then it shifted to the board, you're saying?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. And I don't, it was, but then Gillis stayed in as highway commissioner.
Yeah. Until
Carter was elected, right?
That's
Or,
right. That's
in
right.
fact, didn't Carter make an issue of?
Carter got Burt Lance in, but that's the last time the governor. Now Busby did that, and then Moreland really entrenched that thing. He made one hell of a political organization out of it. Moreland did.
Now, why does that impact the Senate? Simply a numbers thing.
Numbers, yeah. We outvote them 3-1. We can, if we ever get together, we can say who the board members are going to be, and the Senate won't have much input into it. It hasn't worked that way now. Unfortunately, we've divided ourselves up. The Senate has held the balance of power. Now, we changed that on the 2nd District last year. We elected a board member last time, you know, over the Senate and the DOT's objection. And we're going to try our best to elect one next year over their objection, too.
Which one is that?
That's the 10th, I believe it is.
Okay. That's not Downing.
No, that's
the
Tom
first,
Carr.
Yeah. So you're saying that those are the two principal differences?
That's the two principal
as you
differences.
see it between the...
Of course, now there, 3-4 years ago, it appeared that anything I was for, the lieutenant governor was against. Anything I was against, he is for. If you notice this last session, I didn't take any open positions. I waited to make him take the positions. If I agreed with him, I agreed with him. You know, we had a much more peaceful session when I didn't take one. You know, I didn't even go to the Chamber of Commerce thing to speech. I let the majority leader go because I felt like that we needed harmony.
Well, I know that relationship between you and the lieutenant governor has had its twists and turns over the years.
Well, I think there for a while that the lieutenant governor decided to run for governor, and he was going to run against me, and I don't know why, because I have no desire to be governor, even if I thought I could, which I don't think I could be. I have no desire for that. But I ought to be used to folks running against me now. They've been doing it for 12 years now.
Right.
It gets old, though, I will tell you that.
Not bad. Now, of course, I mean, again, early on in Busby and Miller and your administration, you know, I guess the issue of, quote, closed committee, open committee, and so forth emerges, and that's played up at least as a...
And they're the worst violator of it at all, the Senate is. They meet in his office and decide what they're going to do, and then they'll go in there continuing. We don't do that. We do ours, but of course, I was the one that was branded as the bad guy, and because Busby, Sloppy, and I met every night till 10 and 11 o'clock in the conference room in the majority leader's office when we was the old Green Door Committee bringing department heads in. They'd make a recommendation, the governor would make a recommendation, and we'd get them in and say, do you need this? And we've had many departments tell us, this is what the governor wants, but it ain't gonna work. We don't need it, we don't need to do it. But they wouldn't say that in that appropriation because they'd get their butts fired, and I understand that. But I've never been, nobody's ever accused me of being bashful about anybody hearing what I have to say. It doesn't bother me. I'm gonna say what I think. But unfortunately, there are many who just will not do it. But nobody's ever accused me of not saying what I think. I don't believe it.
Right. So you're saying that the way that it worked with you and Sloppy and Busby
Saved us millions of dollars. Millions and millions of dollars.
and that if there had been open committee hearings at that time.
If we had had that meeting, those department heads would have never said what they said to us in front of the press. I still do a lot of that privately with department heads myself, and then pass the information on to members individually. That's bad, but that's the way it has to be done.
Come to you
And tell me, look, this is in there. We don't need that. We need this, and I pass it on to the people, and they bring it up suggestion, and it gets worked out.
and you've also made mention, if I'm not mistaken, that in the heat of budget, working out the budget, people are liable to get angry, frustrated, what have you.
What boils down to now on the conference committee on the budget, for example, our three conferees will get in that room or this room, theirs will get over there, and they'll send messages back and forth, like a bunch of children in school, instead of sitting down and thrashing it out head to head. But they can't say the things they're going to say before the press, really. That's the way they feel about it.
Okay, so how has the budget process changed since you got interested in that process, and then how could it yet be changed or improved?
Well, I still say, and will always believe, that the members of the House ought to know what they're going to vote on in the budget before the press gets it. I really still believe that. But that'll never happen again, I don't believe. As I was thinking the other night, since there's been a conference committee on the budget that's really meant something after we went independent, I've either been on every conference committee or appointed every conference committee that we've had in those years. See, I was on it when I was the floor leader for Governor Manners. I was on it when I was Speaker Pro Tem. And since then, I've appointed all of them. So I've either been on it or appointed every one for, let's see, 4, 7. I was on 7 conference committees, and I've appointed 15. So 22 conference committees, and I've either been on them or appointed every one of them up to now.
How does that process compare to 20-odd years ago?
20-odd years ago, you didn't change anything in the budget. Whatever the governor sent you, you adopted it, and that was it.
Okay.
You know, the state of Georgia never really started making progress, if you'll just stop and consider. When I came to legislature in 1961, the budget was $345 million, something like that. In $6.254 billion now. Up until we declared our independence, you just had one person's idea. The governor's idea was all you had. You didn't have anybody else. And now you got 236 people whose ideas have a chance of passing. You get input, and that's when the state of Georgia really started making progress. What we have to be careful of in Georgia is we do not allow the bureaucrats to get control of our state government like they had the national government, because the bureaucrats run the national government.
I was wondering what difference, not only legislative independence, but sort of the changing demographics, as you were, changing composition of the legislature.
It's changed after the first reapportionment. It's changed very little since then, because except in the metropolitan areas where the Republicans have gotten a little strong, or much stronger, I admit that. They've changed very little. The people elect, if they elect a moderate, they continue to send a moderate. If they elect a conservative, they continue to send a conservative. If they elect a liberal, they continue to send it. So it hasn't changed.
So really
That-
outside of the cities,
been no change.
in either political position or
No,
really for that matter, the type of person who.
no, not really. You see, still in the metropolitan areas, you still got some areas that are conservative. Most of South and North Georgia are conservative. So the conservatives still control it, you see.
And the metropolitan delegations are divided.
Yeah, they
themselves.
fight among themselves. I get a little weary sometimes of refereeing fusses between Fulton County delegation and Cobb County delegation and Chatham County delegation and Richmond County delegation. I get a little bit weary of that sometimes, but somebody has to do it. It looks like.
What circumstances will you become a referee?
Well, they get 'em divided among themselves. Both sides know something got to be done, but they can't agree on how to do it, and then I have to get involved in it and try to help them work it out. I did that for Gwinnett County this year. Of course, the Republicans were fighting among themselves that time.
That's an ironic twist. You
Yeah.
arbitrating among Republicans. Back to the budget. A lot has been said about. There's not enough time to review it. The 40-day period is just not enough to look at the budget.
I disagree with that totally.
Okay.
I disagree with that totally. The committee has ample time to look at it. The members can sit in on the hearings anytime they want to. The people who are actively involved in the budget are involved in it the year round. They keep up with it the year round. They know what's in it. I know what's going on in it all the time because I make it my business to know. Any member can do that. I believe very strongly in a citizens' legislature. You take They used to ask me when I'd make a speech in Atlanta why I was so opposed to a two-party system. And I'd already say, well, I've already told you most of the reason. I said, first of all, I've already told you that Georgia is the fiscally soundest state in the nation, and Democrats did that. Republicans didn't have a thing to do with it because there hadn't been enough of them to affect it. You take the six fiscally unsoundest states in the nation. That's New York, Michigan, Illinois, Ohio, California, and what is the other ones?
One of the,
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania.
I said they stay in session the year round. They're strong two-party system. They stay up there, stay in session year round, giving this special interest this special interest that, anything to perpetuate themselves in office. It don't take any genius to see if I had to run 4 months in a primary, 4 months in the general election, then serve 6 months in the General Assembly. And in 10 months, I couldn't make a living out of 24. And then pretty soon we'd be full-time legislators. In Pennsylvania, it takes $500,000 a year per state legislature. They got officers in their district, officers in their capital, staff in their district. They got everything they want. They stay in session the year round. Carry one step further. Our forefathers never intended for the Congress to be up there the year round. They thought they'd be up there 2 or 3 months, the president would run the country. It hasn't worked that way. And the bureaucrats are responsible for most of that. If we did that, pretty soon we'd be giving away everything we got, and we'd be in the same shape them other states are. But they quit asking me that question.
So you're saying, by extension, even though the budget's a lot more complex, tenfold or whatever it was.
We have staff enough to keep us advised, and they send us memos on what's going on, They don't try to tell us what to do, but they tell us what's going on and what the possibilities are. Let us make the decision.
How could that process be yet further improved, the whole budget process, or what sort of changes do you see?
I
down
see
the
no
road?
changes coming up on ours. You see, our budget appropriation committee meets before the session and has hearings. They get into it 20 to 30 days before the session.
Sure.
And we understand what's going on. Of course, there isn't that much money to divide out after you get your continuation in place anyhow, really. $400 million.
How did you sort of gain your budgetary expertise? I know you've been interested in it and fiscally conservative.
Well, I was involved in it from day one as the governor's floor leader. I've always been a fiscal conservative. I was involved in it, and I learned the process as we went along, and I helped develop the process. That may sound egotistical, but that's facts. I helped develop the process, and I stay on top of it now.
When you say you helped develop the process, which aspects are you talking about?
I helped develop the process of the hearings and the sort of things.
Mhm.
You have to stay in touch with it. You just don't learn it overnight. And I've tried to have people in position in appropriations where one goes on like Busby went on, somebody step in, where Joe Frank went on, somebody step in, and I still participate very strongly in the budget subcommittee. And that way I stay on top of it.
No, it's evident even by your first terms as speaker that you're able to predict, you know, revenue very accurately. And
Well, I've always had a barometer up until a year or two ago that nobody else had. See, my plants out home, Hubbard, Sewell, Warren Sewell, Ray Sewell, they sell 6 months in advance, and I can talk to those salesmen and find out what kind of pre-sale they've had. Proud of, we got a United States Senator that served in the House with, and we got Congressman Rowland, Congressman Hatcher,
Darby.
Buddy Darden. Every one of our folks that runs for Congress have been successful. We had more than that at one time. Elliot Levitas we had at one time. We've been right successful.
Back to the point that you were making about Pennsylvania legislators having to run, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, you lost on both the 4-year term for.
Well, that's a section of the House that I never have really agreed with. I tried to tell them this time, I said, I ain't going to participate in that. I don't believe the people are going to pass it one way or the other. I don't believe they'll pass it this time. The newspapers are going to fight it tooth and toenail, and I understand they're fighting it because it would cut their revenue drastically if they didn't have all those political ads every 2 years. It'd have to cut it in half on political ads, and I understand that. I understand the televisions and the radio station would lose all that money. I understand that. I honestly, it does need to be done because I have many good young representatives, and I'm thinking of two right offhand whose names I won't call.
Right.
But one fella served 2 terms, and he come in to see me and told me, he said, Mr. Speaker, said, I'm not going to run again. I says, why? I said, you're doing well. He said, I've had opposition both times. Said, I've won handily both times. But said, I still owe money on my last campaign. Said, I go home, my law practice is shot. I'm a sole practitioner. Said, there ain't no way I can continue to run every 2 years and make a living for my family, so I'm going to quit. And he quit. And you lose many good young ones because of having to run every 2 years.
Because you have to run even if you win handily.
That's right. You have to get at it and go after it. But we said that it cost $500,000 for a state legislature in Pennsylvania. When you add our staff, our budget office, our fiscal office, and our legislative council office, when you add it all together, it only costs $85,000 a year per state legislature in Georgia. If you take what you pay the legislature, it's less than $25,000 a year. That's the difference in Georgia and Pennsylvania, and who's the soundest. That's right.
What about so you're saying that however, even though you support that idea, you don't think that.
I don't think that people are going to pass it.
And so you're going to back off.
Well, I'm not going to say. If anybody asked me, I'd say I'm for it. I would hope you'd vote for it, but I'm not going to get mad if you don't.
Or go around the state.
Yeah, right. I'm not going around the state pushing it. And another thing that I have never been for is public initiative. I say that people ask me if I'm for it. I say no, I'm not for it because I face public initiative every 2 years. My people don't like what I'm doing, they'll send somebody else to do it. public initiative what got California started in the mess there. And when it's Proposition 12, 14, whatever, when they redid their tax structure, they've been in a mess ever since.
What other kinds of positive changes would you see to make the state government more effective then?
Well, I think we have to have more staff people available to the committees, not in a research thing, but a staff person that the committee can use to get information for them to make the decision. I think that's because, you know, we were the first computerized legislature in the nation, totally legislated everything.
You mean the roll calls or
We were first in everything. We're the envy of everybody. Every state comes around just amazed at how our operation works. I wished we had somewhere where we could print amendments quickly, and eventually on each member's desk will be a teleprompter where they can have the amendment in front of them. It'll be there someday.
I know the reading of bills has changed a lot since.
Yeah, we used to have to read the thing in its entirety. In the new Constitution, we changed that to where all you have to do is read the preamble.
And you and Glenn Ellard used to, if I'm not mistaken, get into a rhythm almost where you were reading the final version and he was reading it in the third reading or whatever.
No, what we'd do is he'd turn 3 or 4 pages at a time. You know, you got a 100-page bill, that'd take you 2 hours to read that sucker. You know, we'd read them during lunch. You know, while we was all at lunch, they'd read the bill. You know, that was terrible. Now you read the caption and that's it.
What other
Of
kinds?
course, under the rules, now any member can get up and move that the bill be read in its entirety, and the majority can order it read, or I can order it read. But there hasn't been one read since we passed a new Constitution. The good member, when he goes in there, knows how he's going to vote on a piece of legislation. The good member will get that synopsis and read it. If he don't understand the synopsis, he'll get the bill and study. I read every synopsis myself. I spend a lot of nights where other guys are out partying while I'm reading synopsis. But I like to know what's going on.
As Speaker, you almost have to keep abreast of what's going on.
I get you in quarter of 8, 7:30, quarter of 8 every morning, never leave till 6:30 either.
What other kinds of ways do you see state government operating more effectively? And we can wind up with that. Or what do you see the biggest challenges over the next decade or so?
Well, I think the biggest challenge, of course, is going to be the developmental highway system, and do something for rural Georgia industrially, where they can start to become self-sufficient among themselves tax-wise. Developmental highway will help that a great deal.
How is that now?
Well, if you have a good road system, industry is more liable to settle there or locate there and give those people who used to farm jobs where they can stay in rural Georgia and start developing.
What other kinds of tax?
I don't foresee any tax in the future except possibly a motor fuel tax. But if that motor fuel tax passes, I think we will have in that bill that the highway DOT will locate the roads and design them and say where they ought to go, but then we will pick priorities as to where we're going to spend the money on those roads.
And any other measures that you foresee that can enable money to be generated without taxing locally?
We have to continue to grow economically as we have in the past 15 years. Our economic growth has been sufficient. You know, we haven't had a tax increase in 17 years.
Right.
The last tax increase was a gas tax. That probably will be the next one. We have to continue to grow economically to where we can continue to expand and do those things. If we pass an additional gas tax, there's $157 million out of the general fund going to DOT that we can take back and put it in, and that will keep us going a long time, that and the growth that comes from it.
So what kind of battles or what kind of issues might be there between the General Assembly and the DOT in terms of determining where that growth takes place?
I think that will be an issue, but I think the majority of the General Assembly ought to be able to say where that road's going if we've got to put up the money to do it.
And that's then of crucial importance for the continued development and stuff.
I think that's correct.
Well, I appreciate this a lot.